this just feels a little bit like it's a niche subject. Like, this doesn't really apply to a lot of different RPGs, but it's something that I feel kind of strongly about, and I wanted to dive into and comment on in particular. Dueling mechanics. So I know of one game that has dueling mechanics, like a separate set of rules for doing a duel as opposed to just doing a regular fight between two people. And as like a corollary to that, their port of this game to D&D 5th edition, I might make a video on that, actually, because that really bugs me. Anyways, Adventures in Rokugan is a 5th edition supplement that is sort of the 5e incarnation for the world of Rokugan, the setting for Legend of the Five Rings. It introduces some dueling mechanics as well, and that is sort of a layer of rules that you apply on top of combat. So that counts. That counts as dueling mechanics. But most people don't know about that. So I think Adventures in Rokugan is probably my impression is that it has gotten very little in the way of like widespread notice, which I think is a shame, because it's honestly a really good supplement. If you are going to play 5th edition, I think Adventures in Rokugan is absolutely worth picking up. It's one of the best values for your money of any book for 5th edition, including Wizards of the Coast's official core content. But I digress. I want to talk about Legend of the Five Rings RPG, which also happens to be in their 5th edition, but not 5th edition, 5th edition of L5R RPG. Their dueling mechanics are really neat, and I wanted to get into them. So in a standard, what they call a skirmish, which is like your normal fight between a handful of individuals versus a handful of individuals. In a normal skirmish, you have like distances, what are called range bands, which is something that Fantasy Flight / Edge Studios is really a fan of. You'll see the same mechanic in Genesis, so there's some shared DNA there. You move range bands relative to other characters and objects in the scene. You pick targets, you make attacks, you inflict conditions. The spellcasters are going to be like, adding terrain types and things like that. It all gets quite messy. But sometimes you're not fighting for your life as much as you are fighting for honor. Sometimes a fight should be a duel. A duel occurs when two people who are inclined to engage in this sort of cultural construct that is the duel cannot resolve their differences in other ways, or if they meet on the battlefield and it's two leaders, we're going to have a one-on-one, this duel of honor between us, and the fate of our followers will be decided by it. Whatever the circumstances may be, you engage in a duel, and there are additional mechanics. I'm going to give you a quick overview, like really, really broad strokes overview of the mechanics, because I know that a lot of people are not familiar with L5R. And then I want to talk about why I like it so much. So first off, you roll initiative. And the initiative roll it uses a different skill than a normal skirmish initiative roll, but it works the same way. And so that sets your base initiative. Now, at the beginning of round 1 of a duel, each participant takes 1 strife, which is your sort of fatigue mechanic. You both take 1 automatically at the start of round 1. And then you can bid secretly an amount of additional strife up to your focus score, which is one of your derived stats, and add that to your initiative for this round. Both players reveal their bid at the same time. They add to their initiative scores, and then you actually determine who goes first in round 1. In round 2, it's the same thing. You go back down to your base initiative. Each participant takes 2 strife and can bid additional strife. Now, for context, you usually have somewhere between like 8 and 16 strife capacity. before you become compromised. Becoming compromised in a duel is pretty much the end of the duel, 9 times out of 10 or better. Because the opponent then is going to get to do a finishing blow on you. I'll get to finishing blows in just a second, but they're called finishing blows for a reason. So you have a strife building up, and that is a really interesting way to represent this sort of rising tension of this duel. Like right at the beginning, you have the stare down, and it even calls it that in the book, the stare down, where you roll initiative, you bid strife. You know, how much can I get away with spending in order to try to go first? Because, you know, when it's just one action versus one action, like who goes first actually can matter a lot, especially like on a round-to-round basis. Like if you can go second in one round and first in the next round, get 2 actions in a row, that's huge. So you got the stare down mechanics, which is really, really cool and fun. You've got a special move that is only available in duels. You can't use this in a regular skirmish. It's called Predict. Now, in Legend of the Five Rings, at the beginning of each of your turns, you pick one of 5 different stances, each corresponding to one of the different elements that are in the game. Each stance has a sort of passive benefit that you get just for being in that stance. And then everything you do while you're in that stance uses that ring, because the rings are also like basically your attributes. They are the elemental approaches to different actions. So you have your 5 elements, which are at various ratings, and then you have a list of skills. And every time you roll 1 element and 1 skill. Basic mechanics of the game. So you adopt a stance. You must use that ring for all your actions, and you get a passive benefit. So different characters are going to specialize in different stances. They're going to put more ranks into a given ring, usually 2 rings. Most characters actually focus on 2 rings, so that you have a fallback ring. What Predict does is that you secretly select 1 ring other than Void. Void is the only ring you cannot choose for this. And you keep that hidden, and that is your action. If the opponent chooses that ring as his stance at the start of their turn, after they choose their stance, you reveal. If you predicted correctly, they take 4 strife and have to choose a different ring, which is a big part of why you should always have 2 good rings, at least. Because if you only have 1 good ring, the opponent's like, well, they've got a much higher earth ring than anything else. They went Earth last turn. They look like an Earth type character. I'm going to predict Earth. And if you have no other good rings, you're kind of gimping yourself by not having a fallback, you know? You know what I mean? The Predict action is just a really, really cool ability. And it's not like a character ability. Anyone can do this in a duel. It's a really, really cool mechanic. The other benefit of Predict, even if the opposition is not hyper specialized into 1 ring, is that you can guarantee that they don't go into a ring whose benefit would mess you up. For example, the Earth ring means that you're functionally immune to critical hits while in Earth stance. The opponent cannot spend opportunities on their dice to inflict critical strikes or other conditions. So there are other ways to get critted, but they're pretty rare. So if your strategy is, I'm not going to try and wear down his fatigue by doing a lot of damage, I just want to get a critical hit, which means you have to hit and spend 2 opportunities to get that critical hit, which could be a killing blow in 1 hit. But if they're in Earth stance, you can't do it. So you go, all right, this turn, I'm going to predict Earth. Except you keep it secret, obviously. And then they either have to go a different ring, opening them up to crits, or they go Earth, they take some strife, and then they have to pick a different ring. It also means that Void is this, and Void sort of represents your sort of instinctual, like centered self. It's not an element like the others. It is separate and distinct from the other 4 elements. And the fact that Predict cannot choose Void is really interesting, because then it means that Void-based characters who invest a lot in Void, have this sort of advantage in a duel where one would expect this sort of self-enlightened, or an enlightened character, one who is high and void, to do well. Like, it's mechanics that reinforce and encourage the kind of narrative that you would expect. The kinds of characters who are good at duels are going to be good in the same way that you would expect them to be. So it's such a really good mechanic. So the stare down, one really great mechanic for initiative round by round. The whatchamacallit, the predict action just adds a whole huge layer of strategy onto this. Now, it takes your turn to do it, so you kind of have to have a reason to. Like, it's not always going to be the default replacement for your attack, because if you're just predicting every round, you're not attacking. But that leads us into the win conditions of the duel. Now, different duels have different conditions. Not every duel is to the death. Some duels are to first strike, some are the first blood, some are like just a certain number of rounds, and then you tally up. There's actually like a points system. I don't think I've ever used it, but there is like in the book, there's a list of like things you get points for. You know, first hit gives you a point. There's a point for making your opponent do certain things, correctly predicting, that kind of stuff. At the end of the duel, which can be defined as like, you know, we're going to go 3 rounds, you add up the points, and whoever has the most points wins the duel. This is for lesser offenses. That is, like, you are not dueling out of anger, but you're dueling to resolve a conflict. So you would have an adjudicator watching the duel, and they tally up the points and determine who wins and who is right. Because in this setting, winning a duel has like legal consequences. You know, like, a lot of things that we would consider unsuitable for dueling over can be decided with a duel in this setting. A great way to end the duel is with the finishing blow. And I said I would get back to this, and I'm so excited about it. So if your opponent at any point in the duel, be it during initiative, the stare down, during their action, stop everything. Or if, sorry, I didn't finish the sentence. If at any point their strife equals their composure, which means they become compromised. That is, they are emotionally compromised. So if they take too much strife, stop everything and perform a finishing blow. A finishing blow is like a regular attack. It follows all the same rules, except that when instead of dealing damage, you deal a critical strike with double the normal severity. Now, considering that swords in this game can kill someone in a hit, if you get pretty lucky and you have and you're built for fighting, you can kill someone in one hit. But double the severity, almost guaranteed to kill in one hit. So if you get to the finishing blow, the opponent has a pretty easy roll to make, at which point you are dead. So maxing out strife is a death sentence. It is an actual fail state in this mechanic. Which means that there are 2 ways to go about this, or actually 3 ways, I guess. There are 3 main routes for winning a duel. You can strife them out, get them flustered, get them to embarrass themselves, and then go for the finish. You can just do regular combat. Like, if you're good at regular combat, you can also be good at a duel. Just be conservative with your own strife. Don't spend it unnecessarily. And, do enough hits to bring up their fatigue. That disables them, that incapacitates them, and then either force them to yield or take the killing blow. Or you can, and this is all assuming that this is a duel to the death. There's even more win conditions if it is not a duel to the death. There's other actual win conditions built into the thing. The other one is like force them out of earth stance and do a critical strike normally. Like, you can just win the same way that you do in a normal fight, but there's all these other layers and these different directions you can approach it from. The dueling mechanics in L5R are really good. Now, I know I have a whole video talking about how good L5R is, and I stand by all that. But in particular, the dueling mechanics are so good. It is honestly, I like dueling more than regular combat in L5R. Even though there's only 2 participants, you would think it'd be a lot more boring. There's also there's a lot less maneuvering because you aren't, having to track positions of different characters relative to each other. It's more or less linear because you only really have to track the distance to each other. And that more or less, it usually stays pretty static. But all these other mechanics, these ways of creating new win conditions, new avenues of approach for combatants to achieve victory. The mechanics are just super duper rich. They're incredibly evocative. And I think it's a shame that more games don't have mechanics like this. And a lot of that kind of comes down to how big of a deal is dueling in other settings, because this is a setting where dueling is a big deal. But I know that's not true for most. I just think it would be interesting, and it doesn't have to be dueling. There could be other things that are evocative of a thing that happens in whatever setting you're writing in. I'm currently struggling to think of an example. But let's say for example you have an Assassin's Creed style RPG, just off the top of my head. I'm not sure if there is an Assassin's Creed RPG, but let's say there is. There is a stark difference between I'm fighting a bunch of guys on the street and I'm stalking my target. It's a very different kind of gameplay, and so having separate mechanics for that would be really good. And having mechanics that make that really interesting and engaging and giving you lots of meaningful options and different ways to approach the assassination moment. Because in Assassin's Creed, that stalking your prey and going in and getting that killing blow is a big part of the fantasy of that setting. So I think having RPGs with more really evocative, very strongly defined fantasies that are represented well mechanically would be a good thing for the RPG community in general. The issue with that, and the reason why we probably don't see a lot of it, is that these mechanics are not really transferable. You can't just take the mechanics from L5R's dueling system and drop them into any other system. They're not really going to work that well. And they might not even be appropriate to the setting, even if it's for dueling. So it is a lot more attractive for game designers to build mechanics that are applicable to lots of different situations so that you can reuse those mechanics. It's just more efficient. But these are very specific mechanics for a very specific purpose, which means that they don't really get used for anything else, which can feel, I imagine as a designer, you can feel like it's not worth it to put as much effort into those as for mechanics that can be used elsewhere. So that might be why we don't see it as often as I perhaps would like. And I can understand that. Still, it is something that I would like to see more of, because those are some of the best moments that I've had in my L5R campaign, is when people are dueling and the tension really builds up. And these are some very powerful moments. In my campaign, quick story. We had a scene where there was what we ended up calling the duel of no strikes, where 2 people were at a disagreement about a course of action. They both felt very strongly about it. Steel was drawn. We started the duel, and they ended up talking each other down by appealing to each other's emotions, by appealing to their sense of empathy towards each other, because they were friends. And it was sort of a don't do this kind of moment, and they ended up resolving the duel. One of them yielded. No attacks were made, but they went 2 rounds of the duel. And it was so good. It was so powerful. It was a really, really cool story moment that just doesn't happen in other games, which is a part of the reason why I think L5R is one of the best RPGs on the market. And the dueling mechanics are a big part of that. And I think I wish more games had dueling mechanics, or better, it doesn't even have to be a one-on-one duel. It can be arena combat. I just think it would be interesting to have that be distinct mechanically from your regular run-of-the-mill, we're fighting bandits or wolves or whatever kind of fight.